By 9:17 a.m. on a Thursday morning in late February, Kellyanne Conway had already violated her own media training principles twice. She had agreed to a joint CNN interview with Representative Jasmine Crockett on the subject of women in political leadership, and in the green room beforehand, she had told the production assistant that this would be good television. She meant it the way a matador means a young bull is good practice. Crockett was seated in the adjacent green room, visible on the monitor, reviewing something on her tablet. Conway watched her for a moment, noted the absence of notes or briefing materials, and smiled. The woman had come unprepared to face someone who had spent 3 decades weaponizing language on national television. The interview began exactly as Conway had designed it to begin. The host introduced both guests and opened with a question about the challenges women face in achieving leadership positions. Conway answered first, her response a masterclass in the technique she had perfected over 30 years. Start with a sympathetic observation, pivot to a partisan attack, wrap it in the language of empowerment, and deliver it all with the cadence of someone sharing wisdom rather than deploying weapons. She spoke for 2 minutes about the importance of women supporting other women, then seamlessly transitioned into criticizing what she called the Democrat Party's tendency to tokenize women of color rather than elevate them on merit. She did not look at Crockett when she said it. She looked at the camera. The implication was clear without being explicit. A technique she had used so many times it had become muscle memory. When she finished, she sat back with the satisfied expression of someone who had just placed a piece on a board and was waiting to see if her opponent understood they were already losing. Crockett thanked the host quietly. She acknowledged Kellyanne by name with the same polite formality she would use addressing a witness at a hearing. And then she said something that made Conway's practiced smile freeze at the edges. She said she wanted to discuss the concept of merit that Kellyanne had just introduced because merit was quantifiable, and if they were going to have a serious conversation about women's advancement in politics, they should probably start by defining what successful merit-based leadership actually looked like when measured against outcomes rather than rhetoric. Conway interrupted for the first time 42 seconds into Crockett's response. She said that metrics could be manipulated, that true leadership was about vision and execution, not statistics. Her voice carried that familiar tone, part teacher, part prosecutor, that she deployed whenever she needed to reframe a question she did not want to answer. Crockett stopped speaking. She waited for Conway to finish. Then she returned to her point with the same measured calm. She said she agreed that leadership required vision, which was why she wanted to examine the outcomes of Kellyanne's vision during her time as counselor to the president. She wanted to look at what had been executed and what the results had been. Conway interrupted again. She said this was typical, that instead of discussing the substance of women's leadership, the Congresswoman wanted to relitigate the Trump administration. She used the word obsessed. She suggested that perhaps Crockett's focus on the past revealed an inability to articulate a positive vision for the future. The host attempted to redirect, but Conway continued. She said that unlike career politicians who had never built anything outside of government, she had run a successful polling company, managed a winning presidential campaign, and served at the highest levels of the White House. She said this with the confidence of someone reciting a resume they had never had to defend. Crockett opened the portfolio she had brought. The leather made a soft sound against the studio table. Inside were 4 folders, each a different color. She did not remove them yet. Instead, she looked at Conway with an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly, simply attentive, the way a physician might regard a patient before explaining test results. Ms. Conway, you mentioned your polling company. You founded the polling company in 1995. Is that correct? Conway's smile returned. Wider now? That's correct. I built it from nothing into one of the most respected women-focused polling firms in the country. Respected, Crockett repeated as if tasting the word. She pulled a document from the first folder, the one with the blue tab. I want to make sure I understand your company's track record correctly. Between 1996 and 2016, the polling company conducted public polling for how many competitive general elections? Conway's smile remained fixed. We conducted hundreds of polls across multiple election cycles. Our client list included senators, governors, Fortune 500 companies. I'm asking about public polling in competitive general elections, Crockett said gently. Polls that made predictions about outcomes that could later be verified against actual results. How many of those did your company conduct that are in the public record? A pause. Conway's hand moved toward the water glass in front of her. Our work was primarily proprietary research for private clients. That's the nature of the business. So just to confirm, Crockett said, still in that same mild tone, in 21 years of running a polling company, you did not conduct public polling that allowed independent verification of accuracy. Conway's voice sharpened. We conducted private polling that informed successful campaigns across the country. Our clients won elections. That's verification. Crockett nodded slowly. She pulled a second document from the blue folder. This is a compilation of every public poll your company released between 1996 and 2016 that I could find in the public record. I found 4. Would you like to know their accuracy rates compared to actual election results? The studio had gone quieter. The host was watching Conway's face. The 2004 Florida gubernatorial poll you released 3 weeks before the election predicted a Republican victory by 11 points. The actual margin was 3 points. That's an 8-point error. The 2008 Nevada Senate poll predicted a Democratic victory by 4 points. Republicans won by 3. That's a 7-point error. The 2012 Wisconsin recall poll predicted Governor Walker would survive by 2 points. He won by 7. 5-point error. In the 2016 poll you personally cited on television 2 weeks before the election, predicting Donald Trump would lose Pennsylvania by 4 points, he won by 0. 7 points. That's a 7-point error in the wrong direction. Crockett placed the document on the table. 4 public polls, average error rate of 6, 2 percentage points. For context, the industry standard for quality polling is an error rate below 3 points. Your company's public record is double that. So when you describe it as one of the most respected polling firms, what metric are you using? Conway's face had undergone a subtle color change. Congresswoman, you're cherry-picking 4 polls out of thousands of private research projects to fit a narrative. I'm examining the only polls that can be verified, Crockett said quietly. You claimed merit-based success. Merit requires measurement. These are the measurements available. If the private work was better, we have no way to verify that, which means we have no way to verify the merit you're claiming. She opened the second folder, the one with the red tab. Let's talk about your role as campaign manager for the Trump campaign. You took over in August 2016. The campaign was polling at 37% nationally when you started. On Election Day, the campaign received 46% of the popular vote. That's a 9-point improvement, which sounds impressive until we examine what actually happened during those 3 months. Conway interrupted for the third time. We won the election. We won the Electoral College. We won states that hadn't gone Republican in decades. That's the only metric that matters. The campaign won, Crockett agreed. But I'm asking about your specific contribution to that win. During the 3 months you managed the campaign, what decisions did you make that can be directly tied to the outcome? Conway began listing accomplishments: message discipline, media strategy, resource allocation. She spoke for 90 seconds, her voice regaining its practiced confidence. Crockett waited until she finished. Then she pulled another document from the red folder. This is the campaign's FEC filing for August through November 2016. It shows where money was spent. During your 3 months as manager, the campaign spent $94 million on paid media. Do you remember who made the media buying decisions? Conway hesitated. Media buying was handled by our consultants in coordination with Brad Parscale, Crockett said. Your digital director. He made the media buying decisions. The FEC filings show that the consulting firms he directed received $58 million of that $94 million. You were campaign manager, but you did not control media buying, which was the campaign's largest expenditure. She pulled out another page. The campaign's ground game in the final 3 months was run by the RNC under Reince Priebus. The data operation was run by Cambridge Analytica under Steve Bannon's direction. The surrogate program was coordinated by Stephen Miller. Ms. Conway, during your 3 months as campaign manager, which specific operational decisions did you personally make that determined resource allocation or strategy? Silence. Conway's hand was now gripping the arm of her chair. 5 seconds. 8. I was the campaign manager, she said finally. Everything that happened was my responsibility. Responsibility and decision-making authority are different things, Crockett said. Her voice had not changed in pitch or volume. I'm asking what you decided. What you personally directed. Because from these FEC filings and from the post-election reporting about campaign operations, it appears that your role was primarily as a public spokesperson rather than an operational manager. You did television appearances. You defended the candidate in interviews. But the actual campaign decisions, where money went, where staff deployed, what messages tested, those were made by other people. She paused. Is that an accurate characterization? Conway's face was now visibly flushed. I set the overall strategic direction. Can you name a specific strategic decision you made that was implemented? Crockett's question was gentle, almost curious. A state where you redirected resources? A message you developed that became campaign advertising? A tactical choice you ordered that can be documented in the record? 12 seconds of silence. Conway's jaw was working as if chewing words that would not form into speech. Finally, the campaign was a collaborative effort. I worked with the team. Crockett nodded. You worked with a team that made the decisions while you spoke to the press about those decisions. That's not campaign management, Ms. Conway. That's public relations. She opened the third folder, the one with the yellow tab. Let's discuss your time as counselor to the president. You served from January 2017 until August 2020, 3 years and 7 months. During that time, what policy initiatives did you personally develop or advance that became White House policy? Conway's response came faster now, defensive. She listed issues: opioid addiction, workforce development, military family support. She spoke for 2 full minutes, her gestures broad, her voice rising. Crockett let her finish. Then she pulled a single sheet from the yellow folder. This is a compilation of every White House policy memorandum, executive order, and legislative proposal issued between January 2017 and August 2020. I went through all of them. I looked for your name in the drafting credits, the working group memberships, the signing ceremony participants. Your name appears on 3 documents. 2 of them are ceremonial proclamations about Women's History Month. The third is a memo about an opioid awareness campaign that consisted of public service announcements, media appearances, again, but no policy changes, no funding allocations, no regulatory action. She looked up from the page. In 3 years and 7 months as a senior White House official, you did not author, co-author, or direct the development of a single substantive policy initiative. You appeared at events. You spoke to press. You defended the president on television, but you did not create policy. Conway's voice cracked slightly when she spoke. My role was counselor to the president. I advised him directly. That's not going to show up in your paperwork. If you advised him directly on policy, then your advice should have influenced policy, Crockett said. Can you name a policy that changed because of your advice? A decision the president made differently because you counseled him? No answer. Conway was staring at the table now. Her hands were trembling slightly. Crockett opened the 4th folder, the one with the green tab. Her voice became softer. Ms. Conway, I want to read you something. This is from an interview you gave to the Washington Post in November 2016, right after the election. You said, and I quote, "I didn't come to Washington to be a spokesperson. I came to make policy. I came to serve the American people with substance, not sound bites." End quote. She closed the folder. But that's not what happened, is it? You came to Washington and you became exactly what you said you didn't want to be. A spokesperson. Someone who appeared on television to defend decisions other people made. You built a 30-year career on the appearance of expertise, polls you never had to verify, campaign decisions you never actually controlled, policy influence you never actually exercised. And you did it by being very, very good at one thing: talking. You are exceptional at filling time with words that sound authoritative but mean nothing. You're exceptional at pivoting away from questions you don't want to answer. You're exceptional at making claims that are impossible to verify and then attacking people who ask for verification. Conway tried to interrupt. Congresswoman, this is absolutely, I'm not finished. The words were not loud, but they landed with absolute finality. You opened this interview by suggesting that I was elevated on the basis of tokenization rather than merit. You implied that women of color in Democratic politics are diversity hires rather than qualified leaders. You did this while sitting across from me with a resume that consists entirely of unverifiable claims, operational roles you didn't actually perform, and 30 years of talking about accomplishments that don't exist in the documentary record. She leaned forward slightly. So let me tell you about merit, Ms. Conway. I was a public defender for 9 years. I tried 63 cases to verdict. I won 47 of them. Those wins are in the court record. Anyone can verify them. I've been in Congress for 18 months. I've passed 3 bills into law. I've introduced 22 pieces of legislation. I've served on 4 committees. That work is in the congressional record. Anyone can verify it. Everything I've done in my career can be measured, can be checked, can be verified by anyone who wants to look. She closed the 4th folder. You've spent 30 years building a career on the appearance of expertise without ever producing evidence of actual accomplishment. And now you want to question my merit. The irony is extraordinary. Conway's breathing was audible in her microphone. Her face had moved from flush to a mottled red and white pattern. Her hands were gripping the chair arms so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She started, then stopped. She tried again. Nothing complete would come. Crockett's voice remained perfectly level. You mentioned earlier that you ran a presidential campaign. That's the story you've told for 8 years. But the truth is, you were a figurehead for 3 months while other people made the actual decisions. You've been telling that story for so long, I don't think you remember anymore that it's not true. And because you've never had to defend it with evidence, because you've spent 3 decades in environments where confident assertion matters more than factual accuracy, you've never had to confront the gap between the person you claim to be and the record that actually exists. She paused. 3 seconds of silence. Until now, Conway's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Her eyes moved to the host, seeking intervention that wasn't coming. The host was writing notes with focused intensity. I think, Conway said, her voice barely above a whisper, we're getting into personal attacks rather than substantive. Everything I've said is about substance, Crockett interrupted. I've cited your polling record, your campaign finance filings, your White House policy documents, your own interview quotes. These are facts, Ms. Conway. If they feel like attacks, that's because you've built a career on people not checking them. Conway stood abruptly. The movement was sudden enough that her chair rolled backward slightly. I don't need to sit here and be lectured by someone who's been in Congress for barely a year. 18 months, Crockett said, still seated, still calm. And in those 18 months, I've authored more verifiable policy than you produced in 4 years at the White House. So if you want to leave, you're welcome to leave. But if you stay in that chair, you need to answer a simple question. Can you name one substantive accomplishment from your 30-year career that can be independently verified through documentation rather than your own claims about what happened? 28 seconds of silence. The longest documented silence in a cable news interview that entire year. Conway stood frozen, half turned toward the exit, her hand on the back of her chair. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. Her eyes were moving between Crockett, the host, and the door. Finally, in a voice that had lost all its practiced smoothness, this was supposed to be a conversation about women in leadership. It is, Crockett said. I'm demonstrating what leadership looks like when you actually have to produce results instead of just talking about them. You're demonstrating what happens when 3 decades of unverified claims meet someone who checked the receipts. Conway's hand released the chair. She took a step toward the exit. Stopped. Turned back. You've prepared quite an ambush, Congresswoman. I prepared by reading your public record, Crockett said. If that feels like an ambush, you might want to consider what that says about the gap between your public claims and your actual documented history. Conway stood there for 5 more seconds, visibly calculating. Then she unclipped her microphone, let it drop on the chair, and walked off the set. Her heels clicked against the studio floor, sharp, rapid, the sound of retreat poorly disguised as choice. The host turned to Crockett. Congresswoman, do you have any final thoughts? Crockett gathered her 4 folders back into her portfolio. Just this. Ms. Conway spent this entire interview suggesting that women of color are elevated on tokenization rather than merit. But when asked to defend her own merit with documentation, she couldn't do it. She walked off rather than answer a simple question about her accomplishments. That tells you everything you need to know about projection. People who accuse others of lacking substance are usually the ones who've never had to prove they possess any. She stood, collecting her portfolio. Women in leadership face enough real challenges without having to endure lectures about merit from people whose entire careers are built on unverified claims. If Ms. Conway wants to have a serious conversation about women's advancement, she should start by being honest about her own record. Until then, she's just noise. The interview ended at 9:47 a.m. By 10:15, the clip was trending. By noon, it had 8 million views. The 30-second moment of Conway standing frozen, unable to answer, unable to leave, unable to speak, that became the clip that played on every network. But the moment that generated the most discussion wasn't the silence. It was what came after. Crockett, perfectly composed, asking in that same measured voice, can you name one substantive accomplishment from your 30-year career that can be independently verified? Because it was such a simple question. And Kellyanne Conway, who had spent 3 decades filling television airtime with words, could not answer it. She walked off instead. And everyone watching understood what that meant. When someone who makes their living talking chooses silence over answering, when they choose exit over explanation, they're not making a power move. They're admitting defeat in the only way they have left. At 11:52 a.m., Conway posted on Twitter, productive discussion this morning about the challenges women face in politics. Looking forward to continued dialogue. The tweet received 186,000 quote tweets in 4 hours. The most popular, with 421,000 likes, read, "Calling an interview where you walked off in silence after being unable to answer a single question productive is the most Kellyanne Conway thing possible." Jasmine Crockett did not tweet about the interview. She spent the afternoon in committee hearings, voting on the floor, meeting with constituents. The work continued. The work that could be documented. The work that could be verified. The work that meant something beyond television appearances and confident assertions, because that was the difference. Crockett did the work and the receipts existed. Conway talked about work and hoped no one would check. For 30 years, no one had checked carefully enough. But when someone finally did, when someone sat down with 4 folders of documentation and asked for evidence instead of accepting assertions, the entire edifice collapsed in 28 seconds of silence and a walk-off that pretended to be a choice but was actually surrender. The interview would be studied, the silence would be analyzed. But the lesson was simpler than any of that. When you build a career on claims you can't defend, eventually you meet someone who asks you to defend them. And when that happens, you have 2 choices: provide evidence or provide excuses. Kellyanne Conway tried to provide excuses. When that failed, she tried to leave. But the video remained. The question remained. And the 28 seconds of silence where a woman who made millions of dollars talking could not find a single word to say, that remained too. Merit, it turned out, was exactly as measurable as Crockett had said. And when measured, some people's careers looked very different than they'd claimed.